Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everyone. As we've been moving through our favorite films of each decade, we've hit the 30s, we've hit the 40s. That's the one that kept me up at night. And now we're moving into the 1950s. And Steve and I have each chosen 4 films that are our favorites. It's all subjective. We know everybody's got something different on the list. And many of them, Steve, that definitely are in that top 10 category, we're not going to talk about because there's already been so much said about them.
Yeah, exactly. What can we add about Sunset Boulevard or From Here to Eternity or All About Eve or Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Streetcar?
Well, I'm sure we would have lovely things to say and very intelligent things.
But we're going to talk about some that maybe you're not quite as familiar with.
Exactly.
Hopefully.
So can I kick it off?
Yeah, kick it off.
This is going to be a hat tip to one of our listeners, Nikki Dukas, for this first pick of mine. It's No Man of Her Own, 1950.
Yes.
Directed by Mitchell Lyson. It's based on the novel I Married a Dead Man by Cornell Woolrich. He wrote the novel under the pseudonym William Irish, but Cornell Woolrich was a really popular film noir writer. In fact, he's still popular. When you look him up on IMDb, he died in 1968. There are 11 titles of his in development.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
They're still using his source material. Wow.
Yes. So this film was actually recently-ish remade in a comedic form in 1996, Mrs. Winterbourne, with Shirley MacLaine, Ricky Lake, and Brendan Fraser. The novel was adapted by 2 female screenwriters, Sally Benson, who wrote Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt, 1943, Meet Me in St. Louis, 1944, and Come to the Stable, 49, and also Catherine Turney, who we spoke about in a previous episode, who worked on the Mildred Pierce screenplay as well as Of Human Bondage, wasn't always given screen credit for those films. Now, this is a film noir, but it's also a melodrama in the best sense.
The best sense.
And a love story. It centers on an abandoned and pregnant woman played by Barbara Stanwyck, who is mistaken for the newlywed wife of an accident victim. The family assumes that Stanwyck is the pregnant daughter-in-law they've never met. And while she starts to correct the situation, she realizes for the sake of her baby that it's really better for the baby to go along with the lie because she's destitute. So
very Stella Dallas of her.
It's very Stella Dallas. It's very reminiscent. So she and her baby begin a new life with the wealthy in-laws. She begins to fall in love with the dead man's brother, played by John Lund, but is being blackmailed by her unscrupulous ex, played by Lyle Betger, putting her life and her relationship with the man she loves in jeopardy. Now, this part was actually tailored for Stanwyck, the 2 female screenwriters, knowing what her strengths were, and I would say, does she have any weaknesses?
None.
None that I know of. I've made no bones about my love and admiration and respect for Miss Stanwyck, and she does not disappoint in this film. As I've said before, she can play anything. Here she transforms from this downtrodden woman, desperately pounding on the door of her sleazy boyfriend. She's pregnant and begging for help at the very top of the film, to taking on this persona of this wealthy widow, navigating moral pitfalls of stealing someone's identity, and then back to desperation. I mean, she just plays it all. What she can do with a look, no dialogue, she can tell a complete story. It's an absolutely riveting film. It's available for rental. I could only find it for rental, $3.99 on streaming services. But let me tell you, Barbara Stanwyck is worth way more than $3.99.
I love that film. And she can elevate any basic movie to something spectacular. You know, and I think she does that in this movie.
She does, yeah. All right, what you got?
My first one is 1950s In a Lonely Place.
Oh.
Directed by Nicholas Ray. Besides Sunset Boulevard, one of my favorite films that really gives you some insight into what it's like behind the scenes in the world of Hollywood is this moody film noir, In a Lonely Place, based on a novel by Dorothy B. Hughes. It was adapted for the screen by Edmund H. North. And it's produced by Humphrey Bogart's own production company, Santana Productions.
Oh.
This film centers on Dixon Steele. He's this washed-up screenwriter who hasn't had a hit in years. He's troubled and he has some anger issues, a lot, which often leads to confrontations and violence and trouble for him. When Dix meets his agent, Mel Littman, played by the great Art Smith, I love that character actor, at this club, Mel offers him the chance to adapt this new novel into a screenplay. But of course, Dix hasn't read the script, but conveniently, the hat check girl, Mildred Atkinson, played by Martha Stewart, the actress, not the lifestyle guru, she overhears their conversation and she offers to tell Dix about the books, and she's read it. Well, Dix invites Mildred back to his apartment, and once Mildred realizes that he's on the level, he's not trying to make a play for her, she agrees. She goes to Dix's apartment, and while they're going into the apartment, they encounter this new tenant, Laurel Gray, played by the wonderful Gloria Grahame, in what I think is a career-defining performance, really. And there's definitely sexual tension between Dix and Laurel as they meet. Mildred then goes inside and tells Dix all about the book, and he gives her cab fare to go home around midnight. The next morning, he learns from his detective friend, played by Frank Lovejoy, that Mildred was murdered, and he is a prime suspect since he was the last person seen with her. Well, while he's being interrogated at the police station, he sees that they brought in Laurel Gray to be questioned in another room. Well, she ends up clearing him. She says that she saw Mildred leave his apartment safe and sound at midnight. He's clear. Well, Dix and Laurel, they begin seeing each other. They fall in love. It's beautiful. She inspires him to write again. She's good for him. But then the investigation continues, and Laurel begins to question whether Dix is innocent or not. And slowly, everything beautiful just begins to be destroyed by this growing doubt and fear inside of her. Can this relationship be saved? Is he a murderer? Is he innocent? Well, it has these dark themes and this moody script, and it just really tackles important questions about trust and relationships. It also addresses the pain of tormented love and makes a strong comment on Hollywood mores and the pitfalls of fame. Great supporting cast. Jeff Donnell, Robert Warwick, Morris Ankrum, and Hadda Brooks, the singer, in a wonderful scene in a club.
Wow, that's a great description of that film.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, thank you.
And in the original book, Dix is a much younger man, but once Bogart fell in love with the script, it was written specifically for him.
Okay.
They made him older, they made him more cynical, and originally Lauren Bacall was supposed to star as Laurel.
Really?
But, and this is horrible, she was under contract to Warner Brothers, and they refused to loan her out. Many people felt that Warner Brothers was punishing Bogart because he left their studio to open up his own production company. So they wouldn't let him use his own wife. So Ginger Rogers was next in line for the Laurel role, but Nicholas Ray felt strongly that his wife, Gloria Grahame, was perfect to play the part. Even though their marriage was in shambles at the time, he wanted to work with her.
Gloria.
And I think we've mentioned this on another episode, but Gloria had to sign a document in order to play this part. And part of the document said, and this is a quote, "My husband, Ray, shall be entitled to direct, control, advise, instruct, and even command my actions during the hours of 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day except Sunday. I acknowledge that in every conceivable situation, his will and judgment shall be considered superior to mine and shall prevail."
Oh, that makes me, I'm speechless. I can't believe she would sign that.
Well, I think she had to get the part, and this is what a controlling guy he was. Well, no shock here, their marriage didn't last.
Guess not.
But in a weird turn of events, 8 years after she divorced Nicholas Ray, she married his son, Anthony Ray.
That's right.
Who was her teenage stepson during her marriage to Nicholas.
Yes.
Well, she and Anthony, and there's a lot of people that say that Nicholas Ray actually found them in bed together when he was a teenager, but I don't think it's ever been really proven.
Yeah.
But anyway, very complicated family.
Moving on to the next one on my list, A Place in the Sun, 1951, directed by George Stevens, based on the novel An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser. Now, I know this is a very well-known film, and we said we were going to find ones that were not well-known, but This film just really sticks with you.
Yeah.
George Stevens, first of all, what a director. I mean, Alice Adams, 1935, Penny Serenade, 1941. I Remember Mama. Shane, Giant, for which he won the Academy Award. He won the Academy Award for this one as well. Now, this is a tragedy. That is just the long and the short of it.
Yeah, no happy ending here, folks.
There's no happy
Spoiler
ending.
alert.
George Eastman, played by Montgomery Clift. Oh, boy. He's a son of poor missionaries. He has a chance meeting with his rich uncle, who gives him an opportunity to better himself at a job at his factory. So he moves. He's on the factory line. He's told not to associate with any of the fellow workers there, but he falls in love, or maybe it's just lust.
Questionable.
With Alice Tripp, who's played by Shelley Winters. Months go by. His rich uncle finally remembers he's been on this assembly line for months. He promotes George not only to a higher position at the factory, but he moves up socially as well. And this is where conflicts and problems arise. He's really a fish out of water everywhere. He meets Angela Vickers, played by Elizabeth Taylor, who befriends him. George falls head over heels for Angela, and she for him. And who wouldn't with those two creatures?
And she was they both were at the peak of their beauty.
It's just, and they're shot so beautifully. It's exquisite. Shelley Winters, however, there's a hitch. She finds out she's pregnant, and she's not going to let Montgomery Clift go. To say that her pregnancy and the circumstances surrounding it, which I won't give away if you haven't seen the film, to say that they cause major problems for everyone is kind of the understatement of the year.
Yes.
Now, the film was nominated for 9 Academy Awards. It won 6. So you know this is a film that really stands up there in terms of the history. But it did not win Best Picture. It lost to An American in Paris, which was kind of an upset because...
Outrage.
Yeah.
Outrage.
It not only was A Place in the Sun up against An American in Paris, but Streetcar Named Desire.
Yeah.
So between the two of those, you would think that would have beaten An American in Paris.
Something smells very fishy that year.
Yeah. Anne Revere, who this podcast loves, plays Montgomery Clift's mother in this film. And as you'll recall, she also played Elizabeth Taylor's mother in National Velvet.
That's right.
We dedicated an entire episode to Anne Revere, episode 5. If you haven't listened to that one, give that a listen. Raymond Burr plays the supporting role of the district attorney, and man, does he chew up that furniture. Ooh. Shelley Winters worked with George Stevens 3 times over her career. This picture, The Greatest Story Ever Told in 1965, The Diary of Anne Frank in 1959, which she won the Academy Award for. Now, let me just say, ironically, without giving anything away, Miss Winters does not swim in this picture, but she was a champion swimmer in the Poseidon Adventure.
That's right. There's always a water theme with Shelley Winters. If you go and look at Night of the Hunter, without giving too much away, let's just say water plays a big part in her character's storyline.
Yes. And can I just say something without, I hope, getting into too much trouble? Shelley Winters is so good in this film that you kind of want to kill her yourself. I mean, she's just so good.
She is very good.
And it's interesting because at this point in her career, she was really kind of a sex symbol.
Yeah.
And really wanted this part, really wanted to test for it. So she dyed her hair brown. This is according to her autobiography. She bought some dowdy clothes to get the part, and she felt really insecure in the filming of it because she was just made to be so unattractive in the film. And when you're standing next to Elizabeth Taylor, yes, of course, you're going to feel that way. So
that will crush anybody's ego.
Exactly. She's quoted as saying that she drove white Cadillac convertibles similar to Elizabeth Taylor's in the film for years afterwards to compensate for her intense feelings of inferiority while making the movie. Taylor and Clift in this film become really good friends. She's only 17 when she makes this movie, which is really remarkable when you see her performance. And she did feel a little intimidated being opposite Clift, who was over 10 years older than her at the time. But their chemistry is just palpable, the heat between the two of them. There's also some interesting editing techniques that were new at the time for this film, so it has that going for it as well. It's a tragedy, it's a romance, it's a morality tale, it's a commentary on hierarchy in society.
Yes.
But really, it's this trifecta of actors, Clift, Taylor, Winters, and then you add George Stevens overseeing it all, and you have kind of a beautiful film.
To me, it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
There's just not one flaw with that film.
Yeah.
It's so good. And the original's really good. I don't know if you've ever seen the
I've
original.
never seen the original.
Yeah, which was an American tragedy. I think it's Sylvia Sidney and Francis D. and
love Sylvia
maybe
Sidney.
Philip Holmes. But it's worth checking out too.
Yeah.
For my next film, it is a wonderful, definitely a lesser-known film noir called Pickup on South Street, 1953, directed by Samuel Fuller. And one of my interests in this film is that I have always been fascinated by the actress Jean Peters. For those of you who may not be familiar with her, she was a very popular actress in the 40s and 50s who abandoned her career at its peak when she agreed to marry the notorious billionaire Howard Hughes. It was the talk of the town when she gave up her career for Howard Hughes. Nobody does that. It's too intoxicating of a drug to walk away from it. But she did. And the only other person I can think that did that was Grace Kelly. But then again, she got to be a princess and run a country and all that. But what did Jean quit for? Was it true love? Was it, security of having a strong male figure? Because her father died when she was young and she was always sort of looking for that father figure.
Yeah.
Or was it, as many people have heard, and it's been claimed, that Howard Hughes agreed to pay her a cool $1 million, which would equal about $10 million today, if she would leave her career and play house with him. So we may never really know if it was true love or if it was the money, but she left her career behind and she disappeared. And I'm just fascinated by that story.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And this particular movie, Pickup on South Street, I think, along with Niagara, is her best film, hands down. As I mentioned, it was written and directed by Samuel Fuller. It's a film noir classic. It was really more of a B picture back in the day, but over time it's been recognized as a real classic in the film noir genre. It's about a pickpocket named Skip McCoy, played by the wonderful Richard Widmark.
Oh.
He steals the wallet of a B-girl named Candy, played by Jean Peters, on a crowded New York City subway. Unbeknownst to Skip or Candy, in the wallet is a microfilm of top secret government information.
Of course.
Of course there is. Candy was actually delivering this to as a final favor to her ex-boyfriend, Joey, played by Richard Kiley. She believes the wallet contains business secrets. She has no idea that it's much bigger than that and what this means. So now the FBI have to track down Skip McCoy to get these secrets. So Skip realizes that somebody's on his trail. So with the help of a fellow grifter named Mo Williams, played by the sublime Thelma Ritter.
Yes.
He's got a few tricks of his own up his sleeves. I won't get too much into it. It's a very complicated plot line, and it really gets into the beginnings of the Cold War in the United States.
Yeah.
I think the shift of the country's enemy being the Nazis has shifted to the Russians and the Cold War, and this is a really groundbreaking movie that really depicts that. Well, the film received only one Oscar nomination, and that was for Thelma Ritter in her genius turn as Mo. That year, I think she was beaten by Donna Reed from Here to Eternity. Tough call.
Yes.
Tough call, but she's so good. Fuller had trouble casting the female lead of Candy. Get this. He turned down Marilyn Monroe, Shelley Winters, and Ava Gardner.
What?
He thought they were all too glamorous.
Okay.
He wanted somebody a little earthier. And so 20th Century Fox, they really pushed Betty Grable on him. But Betty Grable wanted to add a song and dance number.
They see Betty Grable as earthy?
Exactly, which Samuel Fuller was not having a song and dance number in his very dark film noir. So eventually he found his Candy when he was at the commissary of the studio and he saw Jean Peters walk into the commissary to have lunch one day. He noticed that she walked with a slight bow-legged way.
Okay.
Which he felt is the way that many prostitutes would walk.
Oh,
which is a very bizarre way to cast an actress.
Yes.
And B, how did he know how a prostitute walked?
Yeah, and that's very
that's
just weird.
Basically how she got the role. He just liked how she walked.
Okay.
I mean, she did screen tests and he thought her intelligence and spunkiness and her versatility was great. So he cast her and she started immediately. So I love that that's how she got cast.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to check that one out. I think it's time for the question to this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And since we're talking about the 1950s, the question is simple, straightforward. What was the highest grossing film of the 1950s, the entire decade?
Great question. We'll be right back with the answer and more about our favorite films from the 1950s after this.
Hey, Steve and Nan will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. Eddie Mannix worked at MGM from 1924 to 1962. He became notorious as a fixer. Mannix was like the Winston Wolfe of MGM. He was there to clean up messes. He's alleged to have arranged abortions, kept Judy Garland addicted to pills, even killed George Reeves for allegedly having an affair with his wife. He resorted to blackmail on occasion to keep stars in line. He was even on the scene before the police got there when it came to some notorious Hollywood deaths. Shades of LA Confidential. Mannix was the general manager of MGM and enjoyed almost unlimited influence at the studio. It was actually Mannix who made sure gossip columnists didn't know if a star was in rehab. He covered up fistfights and car accidents, even fed false stories to the magazines to throw them off the trail of real scandals. Ah, the good old days of old Hollywood, huh? Now back to Steve and Nan from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody, and we're going to continue on with our favorite films of the 50s. But first, a big shout out to our listener of the week, Mary Alonzo. Mary wants us to do an episode on Tom Drake or Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald.
Oh, wow.
So thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Mary. My next film is 1957, Witness for the Prosecution.
Oh.
Directed by Billy Wilder, based on the play by Agatha Christie. 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Editing, Sound, Best Director, Best Supporting Actress for Elsa Lanchester, and Best Leading Actor for Charles Laughton. This is a story of a wealthy older woman who's found murdered, and when it's revealed that she left a large sum of money to a man named Leonard Vole, the man, played by Tyrone Power, is accused of murder. Now, a well-known barrister, Sir Wilfrid, played by, guess who? Charles Laughton.
Of course.
He's recovering from a heart attack, and he decides to take on the case. Things become complicated when Leonard Vole's wife, played by Marlene Dietrich, testifies against him, hence the title of the film. Now, there are many wonderful character actors in this film. Elsa Lanchester plays Sir Wilfrid's nurse, of course, off-screen. She was wife to Charles Laughton. Their scenes together are just delicious as she attempts at every turn to keep him away from his brandy and his cigars. John Williams, a wonderful character actor, plays Sir Wilfrid's junior counsel. He's always the perfect detective or the perfect butler, right? Appeared in a number of films. One that almost made my list for the 50s, Dial M for Murder and Sabrina. Ian Wolfe plays Carter, Sir Wilfrid's manservant. The woman who is murdered, played by Norma Varden.
I love her.
Oh my gosh, she enjoyed a long career, and listeners will, I'm sure, remember as Frau Schmidt in Sound of Music.
And also, she is the woman in Strangers on a Train that Robert Walker goes into a trance and almost chokes at the cocktail party.
Yes, she's wonderful.
She's great.
And finally, Una O'Connor, who plays Janet McKenzie, the murdered woman's servant. Now, you'll notice that I kind of skipped over a lot of plot points.
Yes.
At the end of this film, when the credits are rolling, there's a voiceover, and I think it's Tyrone Power actually, saying, "The management of this theater suggests that for the greater entertainment of your friends who have not yet seen the picture, you will not divulge to anyone the script or the ending of Witness for the Prosecution. So I'm not going to divulge any more of the plot, except to say there are so many twists and turns, you will think you know where it's going, and you will be completely wrong. And then you'll think again you know, and it'll change again." This was Tyrone Power's last completed film role, known as one of the great romantic swashbuckling stars of the mid-20th century. He died at just 44 years old of a massive heart attack during a dueling scene with George Sanders while they were filming Solomon and Sheba, directed by King Vidor. Yep. I don't want to ignore the work of Marlene Dietrich in this film. She is suitably mysterious, with an alternately hard edge and some vulnerability mixed in. But because of some plot things, I don't want to go too much into her.
It's tough to talk about her without giving away too much.
Yes, you don't want to give away too much. But can I just talk about Charles Laughton for a second? So it's amazing to me, Steve. We have done over 50 episodes of this podcast. And if I'm not mistaken, we have not ever talked about Charles Laughton.
We've never mentioned him. I know. And he's so mentionable.
I just can't even. He began in the theater. He trained at London's Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. Played a wide range of classical and modern roles, one of the greatest film actors of his time. I think even Daniel Day-Lewis credits him as being a huge influence. He won the Academy Award for The Private Life of Henry VIII for Best Actor. He was in Mutiny on the Bounty, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, on and on. In this film, he is able to play multiple things at once, which to me is one of the true tests of any great actor. He manifests the physical challenges of having gone through a health crisis, while at the same time he's holding court, literally and figuratively. He's holding court. He flouts this theatricality, but it's completely believable.
Yes.
And he manages to create this electricity through what are a lot of long trial scenes. We look to him at every turn to see where this story is going to take us. He's like our roadmap.
Totally.
And
he's our North Star.
He is. He's our North Star. And one last thing. Man, does he know how to use a monocle. I mean,
and if you haven't seen the movie, you'll so appreciate it once you do.
So again, lots of surprises. If you've already seen it, share it with someone who hasn't seen it, but don't give away the ending. Okay, it's free on Tubi right now.
Oh, nice.
All right.
So my next film is, and this movie, we've talked about it a little bit on the podcast for its current relevance.
Okay.
It's very relevant right now, and that is A Face in the Crowd, 1957, directed by Elia Kazan. If you only know Andy Griffith as Sheriff Andy Taylor on the Andy Griffith Show,
or Matlock,
yes, then you don't know Andy Griffith.
Yeah.
In this iconic and somewhat prophetic film, A Face in the Crowd, directed by Elia Kazan and written by Bud Schulberg, Griffith plays Lonesome Rhodes, a charismatic drifter who's discovered in jail by this ambitious young radio producer played by one of my favorites, Patricia Neal. She sees the potential in his homespun charm, and she puts him on the radio. Well, with his down-home charm and humor and his gee shucks golly gee whiz sensibility, he soon has legions of fans who tune in every week to hear his simple messages of how the world should be.
Right.
Well, as his fan base continues to grow to almost zealot-like adoration, the power of his influence is not lost on him. He finally realizes that there's money to be made off of his influence, and soon he begins to use his power in very dangerous ways, knowing that people will follow him like sheep. As his fame grows with the American people, his ego and his thirst for power ultimately rises to a destructive crescendo that results in his ultimate downfall. It's an important film about the power of the media and how media influences can be destructive.
Yes.
It was a stunning film debut for Andy Griffith, who gives this powerful, nuanced performance that still resonates today. It still gives me chills when I watch this man do this role. It was also the impressive film debut of his co-star, Lee Remick. She played his 17-year-old baton-twirling wife.
Oh, great.
To perfection. Remick arrived on location 3 weeks early because she had to learn how to twirl from the local girls, the local majorettes.
I love that.
I know. It's a great supporting cast, which included Anthony Franciosa and Walter Matthau. And to create this authentic feel of the television media in the day, Kazan cast these well-known media personalities such as Sam Levinson and Mike Wallace, Earl Wilson, and Walter Winchell in cameo roles, which really added to a very realistic feel to this movie. You really question, is this really happening? Surprisingly, this film was not very well received. It received 0 Oscar nominations, which is criminal because Andy Griffith was totally robbed. He should have been nominated
at least.
And I think the problem was this movie was just way too ahead of its time.
Yeah.
People weren't ready for this. I think people still had such blind trust in the media and journalism that I don't think they wanted to know that there was maybe corruption and destructive possibilities in the wrong hands.
Yes, we were still naive back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great line. Can I just say one of my favorite lines from the movie?
Please do. And will you do it like Andy Griffith?
Oh, I can't. I wish I could. And this is from Lonesome Rhodes, played by Andy Griffith. He says, "Those morons out there, shucks. I could take chicken fertilizer and sell it to them as caviar. I could make them eat hot dogs and think it was steak. Sure, I got them like this. You know what the public's like? A cage of guinea pigs. Good night, you stupid idiots. Good night, you miserable slobs. You're a lot of trained seals. I toss them a dead fish and they'll flap their wings."
Wow.
Sound familiar? And, besides that quote, I think to really sum up the movie, I'm just going to read the tagline on IMDb, and it's great. Power. He loved it. He took it raw in big gulpfuls. He liked the taste, the way it mixed with bourbon and the sin in his blood. There you have it, folks.
Wow.
Great movie.
All right, we might have to watch that one tonight.
Oh, it's so good.
My last film is from 1958, directed by William Wyler, The Big Country.
Yes,
Now,
great movie.
I know you might not think I'm a big fan of Westerns, but let me tell you, if you think, as a listener, if you're listening and you think, I don't like Westerns, you have got to watch this Western.
Yes.
This is such an underrated film in general, but specifically of this genre.
And a very unusual Western, I think.
It really is. It's based on the story Ambush at Blanco Canyon by Donald Hamilton, which was serialized in the Saturday Evening Post. This film was co-produced by William Wyler and its star Gregory Peck. Now, they had worked together on Roman Holiday. At least 6 different screenwriters are credited, but neither Wyler nor Peck were ultimately happy with the shooting script, but they had to go. It was sort of like what Lorne Michaels says about SNL.
Yeah.
He says, we don't go on at 11:30 because the show's ready. We go on because it's 11:30. And so they had to just start shooting.
Yeah.
So the plot centers around 2 families. The Terrells, headed by patriarch Major Henry, played by Charles Bickford, and the Hannesseys, headed by patriarch Rufus Hannessey, with the most amazing eyebrows you've ever seen in your life, played by Burl Ives.
Burl.
Yes. Now, both families have cattle ranches, and they are fighting over access to water on the Big Muddy, which is owned by Julia Maragon, played by Gene Simmons. Gregory Peck plays Jim McKay, a sea captain from the East who arrives in this western town to marry Major Terrell's daughter, Patricia, played by Carol Baker. Peck is, because he's a sea captain, he's used to the sea, not the land, and he learns very quickly that the folks in the West handle conflicts and challenges very differently. The fight over the water and the land is at the crux of this picture. And the story's depiction, talking about your previous film being timely, the story's depiction of conflict is also very timely. You can keep fighting until one or both of you is dead, or you can come to the realization that violence doesn't solve anything.
Yeah.
It's also a love story, and you kind of know what's going to happen here, because
yeah.
there's one wise woman and there's one not so wise.
Pack your bags, Carol Baker.
Yes. Now, this was a strenuous shoot for lots of reasons. Just looking at it on paper, the number of locations alone, it's over 20 locations. They're out in the West. They're in Arizona.
Yeah.
They're in California. And it created a break in the friendship between Peck and Wyler for 3 years. They really didn't speak to each other.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Wyler
Wow.
said, you couldn't pay me $1 million to direct Peck again. And he never did. They did come back to being friends after about 3 years. But Charles Bickford had problems with Wyler. Wyler is famous for doing lots of takes. It drove Bickford crazy. Gene Simmons was traumatized by him. They would get script changes overnight. She would memorize, stay up all night, and then she'd get there in the morning and they'd change the script again.
Wow.
I mean, it sounds like it was just really, really tough. But here's the thing. It's epic.
Oh, so good.
It clocks in at 2 hours and 46 minutes. Don't let that stop you,
No.
because the time goes so fast. It's a beautiful and powerful picture. You're completely unaware of that almost 3 hours. The score
Oh, great
by
score.
Jerome Moross, nominated for an Academy Award. It'll be familiar to most of you. It's exactly the score you want for a Western. And apparently, another side note on Wyler, he hated the score and wanted to change it. And Peck was like, no, we're not changing the score. Thank you for Peck holding through with that. And then, of course, there's the cinematography. Franz Planer is the cinematographer, and he captures the West like it's a painting. Just absolutely beautiful. Gregory Peck, wonderful performance in many different ways, but a really kind of funny sequence with him getting thrown off a horse called Thunder, and you can imagine what that name implies, as well as beautiful performances by Gene Simmons and Carol Baker.
Yes.
Charlton Heston plays a supporting role, and he had to be convinced to do it because his star was on the rise. And
I wonder if that was a favor, because I was surprised to see him in such a small role.
I was too, and he's quoted as saying that he didn't want to do it, and he said no. And Wyler kept after him, and his agent, who was the same agent as Wyler, said, this would be good for you to work with Wyler. And indeed it was, and he did love working with him. He plays a character named Steve Leach, and I kind of think of him as the Judd Fry of Oklahoma in this film.
Yes.
But maybe even more of a Judd Fry is Chuck Connors
Yes.
in this film, who plays Buck Hennessy, he's just despicable.
Awful.
Although you kind of feel sorry for him in the end. And then Burl Ives, with the aforementioned eyebrows, gives an Academy Award-winning performance, and it was his only nomination. You can watch it free on Tubi.
Nice. Great choice.
Thank you.
Well, my final choice, you mentioned that Westerns, people probably don't think of you as a Westerns gal. Well, this one's one that may throw people off too. It's not a movie that I would typically be known for.
Okay.
My last one is the romantic light comedy Indiscreet.
Oh, what a great choice.
1958 by the wonderful Stanley Donen, who's mostly known for his musicals, but this is very light, sophisticated fare. Unlike the film noirs that I usually gravitate towards, but this movie is so special I couldn't not include it. It left such an impression on me that every time I see it, I'm blown away by the witty, sophisticated dialogue from the screenwriter, Norman Krasna, who also wrote the play that the film's based on. And then there's Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman.
Yeah.
I mean, was there ever a more dapper, debonair, handsome star than Cary Grant?
No.
Was there ever a more regal, elegant, breathtaking actress than Ingrid Bergman?
No.
No. And put them together and it's just, wow,
Yeah.
magic. They had appeared previously in Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious.
Which I love that
to
film.
Great chemistry there. And it's sort of surprising to me that it took an entire decade for them to be rematched on screen.
Right.
But here they are. Stanley Donen's got them on camera. They're beautiful. The script's beautiful. The movie's beautiful. And the storyline is really cool and really interesting. When Anna Coleman, played by Ingrid Bergman, she's a successful London-based stage actress, she meets this dashing economist. How boring does that sound? But when
it's Cary Grant.
when it's Cary Grant, you don't care. She meets them through her sister and brother-in-law, played to perfection, and they're really kind of like the comic relief, and they're wonderful, is Cecil Parker and Phyllis Calvert. She's immediately smitten. So she boldly asks him out on a date. Very forward-thinking, Ingrid, back in those days.
I like it.
Well, he tells her that he's married, but he's separated, and he's unable to divorce his wife. However, the truth of the matter is, and I don't think this is a spoiler alert because you find out pretty early on, that he's actually single, but he uses the "I'm married" excuse to keep women from falling in love with him.
Oh, because it happens so
because you're Cary Grant.
Yes, yes.
Well, this time things change because he starts to fall for her, but he's already presented this "I'm married" facade.
Right.
So as he falls for her and she falls for him, but she knows it's impossible because he's married, comedy, romance, misunderstandings, it's got it all. This one's a charmer, but the making of the film almost sounds as interesting as the film itself because the rights to the play, which was called Kind Sir, was initially bought by producers Josh Logan, who we just mentioned, Mary Martin, and Charles Boyer. When no studio wanted to fund the film, Krasna convinced the trio to sell him back the rights for $10,000, but he didn't tell them that he had gotten Cary Grant to agree to the male lead, so the property was much more valuable at that point.
Of course, how smart.
Very sneaky move on his part.
Yes.
Well, United Artists, they were initially interested in financing the film, but only if Marilyn Monroe or Jane Mansfield played the female lead.
You mean not Ingrid Bergman?
Yeah. What were they
The
thinking?
heck? Yeah.
Well, Krasna and Cary Grant rightfully said, no thanks. And, because Cary Grant always wanted Ingrid Bergman. That was who he had his heart set on.
Yes.
So, maybe even if he tried, maybe he was tired of being paired with leading ladies who were, half his age. He wanted a contemporary who could hold her own against him.
It's ridiculous.
And he got it with her. They were amazing together. Yeah. Again, surprisingly, it received no Oscar love, which really surprises me. It was nominated for Golden Globes for Best Picture Comedy, also for Best Actor for Grant and Best Actress for Bergman. And one thing I love about the Golden Globes that they get right is they give an award for the best comedy and the best drama. And I think the Academy Award should follow suit.
Right.
Because it's so hard to compare a light, sophisticated comedy with this gripping drama.
And comedies often get the short end of the stick.
They always do.
Yeah.
So great movie, great performances.
Good
if you haven't seen it, go watch it.
That's a great choice. Well, as we said when we started, there were so many. Just looking at the decade, Steve.
Oh, my gosh.
Hitchcock alone, it was his
Strangers
heyday.
on a Train, Dial M for Murder.
Rear Window, North by Northwest, and Vertigo, all in the 50s.
Night of the Hunter, Shane, other great movies.
Some Like It Hot,
decade.
Bridge on the River Kwai.
Yeah, there's so many we could.
Yeah.
I had more trouble picking my movies for the 50s than any
40s.
other decade. Yeah.
All right, well, I can't wait to hear what happens in the 60s. I think it's time for this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And the question was simple. What was the highest grossing film of the 1950s? It's surprising. I did not guess it. Any care to guess?
I'm going to guess it's a Hitchcock, but that's all I'm going to say.
Oh, and you would be wrong. It was actually King Solomon's Mines, starring Stuart Granger and Deborah Carr.
Well, that is crazy.
Yeah, which is this adventure picture about the adventurer Alan Quatermain, who tries to find this group of people who were looking for King Solomon. It's not
That's
what
so
I would have
random.
thought. Yes, I
That's
would have thought
very
all about
random.
Eve. I would have
I
thought.
almost said all about Eve,
So
yeah.
many Sunset Boulevard. There's so
right.
many others I would have picked.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review. And if you would follow us on social media, we are at the handle @FromBeneathTheHollywood and you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and you can watch the podcast on YouTube.
And we love hearing from you. We'd especially love to hear, what are your favorite movies of the 1950s?
Yes.
Please email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.